In this video, we'll talk about the request library, which is inbuilt library in Python, and how can we use that request library to have the different kind of request we studied, the get request and a post request. Let's go further. So before that, we need to know some status code, which are the standard status code in the HTTP. We have 200 for a successful, which means the request has been completed successfully. So the status code in return we get is 200. Similarly, the 302 is found redirection. If I go to www.google with the different spelling, maybe one more O, G triple O L, something like that. And Google knows that people makes the similar kind of mistake, and it has bought that website and created a link that if someone uh, accidentally comes on this page, it refers back to the original Google homepage. So then we will have this response of 302 as a found redirection. This is the response status we will get. Similarly, if you try to reach to some unknown URL which is not there, it will say 404, which means could not find anything on that particular URL. This is the response which it will automatically generate. Similarly, the 500 as internal server error. When we request something and in response we don't get anything. So in that case, we will get a 500 internal server error. Because of some internal issues, we could not deliver you the final product. So these were some of the HTTP standard status codes. You can go to the Chrome browser and you can see in the status of every request, which we saw earlier in the video. We got the get and a post request. There we had some codes as 200 for successful. There you can see there will be different type of response for different requests there. Now let's get back to our request library and how can we use that to get and post some data. So this is our very simple code to post some data in our request library. So let me get back to our code here, and for testing purpose, let me create one new file. It might be the test.py file, and within this test.py file I'll try to create a get request and a post request for using the request library. So for now we cannot just directly use our Django server uh, because it might be giving us some error and we will not be able to understand because we are actually learning the request library. So let's use something which is fully made, and there we can test our request and are they are getting in the right way or not. So there is website called as webhook.site. It tells you, it gives a unique URL to you for testing your request and what type of request you are using, and if you are sending a data, is it reaching there in a proper way or not. So it gives us this unique URL where we can test either how our requests are getting. So let's first save this URL as a string, and this is our URL, and let's import our request library. And along with that, let's import JSON too, because at the end we'll be sending the data in the JSON format only. Now let's try to get some data from this URL. So we can say response is equals to request dot get, and get is from the URL which we have earlier and print the response dot status code which we studied earlier. Let's try to run our code using Python 3 test.py file. I forgot to use Python 3 here. Let me rerun the file and we got 200 as a status code, which means successful. Let's try to print whatever the response is coming. It says the response is 200. So our GET request is being completed successfully. Now, what originally we want is we want to learn how to create a POST request because GET request can be done from the URL also, from the browser also, sorry. Now, actually we want is to test our Django endpoint, the how to post, if we are posting a data, is it either getting saved correctly or not. Now let's create a data which is same as we want to test in our Django application. So this data can be a new about a new shirt which is coming from the front end, and this is t-shirt, and again the price can be 300 and size large and color it can be black, white too. Okay, so this is the data which is sort of like what we want to be saved in our database, which will be coming from the front end. So we want to send this data to this particular URL. Now we just need to change this request.get to post, and the URL will remain the same. And in the JSON, we can have this data because our data is already in our JSON format. Now let's see what happens when we try, okay, sorry, yeah, when we try to run the test file. Again, we got a response of 200, which means our request was successful. And now let's go back to that site, and here let's refresh it. So here we can see we got two GET requests. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so this is perfect. So we got two GET requests and one POST request. So this website helps you to see what things which we're doing. So we had two GET request and one POST request. And inside this POST request, we can see our raw content is the same as the thing which we sent as a data. So this is how we can have a GET request and a POST request from a Python code only. Let me close this website. Now let's try to get whatever is at this URL. In the main section, and now I'll change this post to get here, and I'll remove this data, and I'll try to print the response. So again, it's successful. So let's also try to print whatever text we are getting. So we are getting the same result which we are expecting. We are getting the JSON which we requested for. So the GET request is working fine. Now, similarly, let's create a POST request, and within the JSON, we'll give the data. So what we're expecting is that this data, which is a new shirt, this data will get saved in the list of the men. Now let's run our code and a response we should get the request was done successfully. So we have got some error here. It does not looks like this is the response which we were expecting. As you can see, it says forbidden, and here it says CSRF verification failed, request aborted. So there is some problem. How and why we cannot post it, although we have checked that request library is working fine, we can post anything. So here comes the course error. Let's try to understand first what exactly is course, and then we'll follow how we can remove this error and actually finally post the data which we want in our database.